Hello and welcome to Undead Gaming News, your one-stop shop for all things gaming. I'm your host Zombie, and first up this week, senior Microsoft staff along with various game industry stakeholders have been taken to the stand recently, as the US Federal Trade Commission are attempting to block the proposed $65 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard, and the court documents have become public, one of which shows an email from February of 2022 from Bethesda executive Pete Hines, in which he voices his confusion and frustration about Microsoft's stated decision to keep Bethesda games exclusive to its console platform, while staying committed to Sony in regards to Call of Duty. The email from Pete was sent to fellow Bethesda head honchos Todd Howard, Todd Vaughn, and Jamie Leder. In it, Pete tells his fellow executives that he's confused by a then recent blog post from Microsoft's Vice Chair and President Brad Smith, in which Brad pledges to keep Activision games like Call of Duty on PlayStation, in the event Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard goes through. It seems like no one at Microsoft gave Bethesda forewarning of its non-exclusivity policy for Call of Duty either, which only added to Pete's consternation after quoting a section of Brad's blog post in which he affirmed Call of Duty would be available on PlayStation. Pete asked if anyone on Xbox thought about giving them a heads up, and also asked, don't they think a journalist might find Todd and press him on why it's okay for Call of Duty or any Activision Blizzard games, but not the Elder Scrolls 6 or Starfield. Pete added that this could continue to come up in any or every future interview Todd does. But this email exchange wasn't the only court document to be released, as there was also a strategy document relating to what Microsoft would do if they were able to successfully acquire Sega. The plans were as follows. Microsoft would have acquired Sega and worked with the company operating on a set of general principles. First, Microsoft would continue to develop and sell acquired games on relevant platforms. Second, titles formerly exclusive to PlayStation and or Nintendo consoles would also be ported to Xbox. And third, all acquired games and franchises would launch on Xbox Game Pass for PC, console, and the cloud. Boosting the Game Pass library seems to have also been a key motivation here. In an email also disclosed as part of the trial, Xbox boss Phil Spencer requested permission from Microsoft CFO Amy Hood and CEO Satya Nadella to talk with Sega executives about acquiring its game studios, where he wrote, "We believe that Sega has built a well-balanced portfolio of games across segments with global geographical appeal, and will help us accelerate Xbox Game Pass, both on and off console." Alongside Sega, Microsoft considered acquiring Niantic and Bungie to bolster Game Pass and mobile business, but also among these court documents was a Microsoft summary card concerning Bohemia Interactive, the developer behind Arma, DayZ and Vigor. The document gives a potted history of the studio, explaining that its major properties and strategy, during which it notes DayZ remains one of the most played PC console games to this day, citing a peak concurrent user count for the 30 days before the submission of just under 35,000 players, and a total of just under 19 million console hours logged. Then it goes on to confirm that DayZ 2 is in development. Under additional information, the document says that the developer is working on Arma Reforged, Arma 4, and DayZ 2. We've known about the first two for a while, and Reforged is currently in early access. No projected release window is given, nor any clue on how far along in development the project actually is, but various player stats listed by Microsoft also make it clear that DayZ is by far the studio's most popular game. One other interesting note from this document is that Bohemia finds difficulty accepting PC Game Pass, even though it's happy with DayZ's performance on console. As for DayZ 2, don't expect to hear much more until Bohemia's got Arma 4 out of the door, which could be years away. However, something that is going to be releasing somewhat soon is a new Guild Wars 2 expansion. Its fourth expansion, called Secrets of the Obscure, will release on August the 22nd. This will be the first in the MMO's new style of smaller, more frequent expansions, which is why it's releasing so soon after last year's End of Dragons. The four biggest things you'll need to know about the expansion are: Secrets of the Obscure is going to pay off one of the major mysteries still lingering from Guild Wars 1's release back in 2005, as you're going to find out what's inside of the Wizard's Tower floating above Keswick's Hills. Also, the Weapon Master training feature will give each profession the ability to freely equip the weapons previously tied to their elite specializations. Secrets of the Obscure is adding a new legendary armor set. This is one earned entirely through open-world PvE activities, and the Skyscale mount is going to be easier to earn, but will gain new functionality for those who've already completed the long, arduous quest chain. With the dragon threat dealt with, Secrets of the Obscure is the first major taste of what's next for the game's story. The adventure will begin with a climb through the Skywatch Archipelago, the first of 2 new maps being added to the game on release day. Hanging in the sky above Tyria, these floating islands are under attack from the Cryptis, a demonic race of malevolent beings streaming through instabilities in the mists and threatening the fragile peace of the world in the wake of the defeat of the Elder Dragons, which follows in an epic struggle into the Demon Realm, where the fate of the world rests in the hands of the player and their secretive new allies. As announced earlier this year, Secrets of the Obscure is the first of Guild Wars 2's new style of expansion. These smaller releases will feature just 2 maps on release, with a third arriving as part of a free post-expansion update cycle. The test for this new style is going to be its consistency. Old expansions and Living World episodes were infrequent and sporadic, often leaving the player base to wonder if the game was even going to continue at all. Even if each new release offers less stuff, it will be a net positive if AreaNet can keep up with a regular release and update cycle. However, in other news, last week we talked about the Yakuza Complete series that dropped on GOG, bundling its first 7 games in the franchise within that offering. It's a great deal, but fans have been testing out the release to see if there's anything different about it, and have found a change that's confusing many people. While the games themselves appear to be identical to the versions already available on Steam, there were 2 notable differences. The first was that this being GOG, there was no DRM, which if you're unfamiliar with GOG, their promise has always been to provide DRM-free games. The second change is that in a number of the games, changes have been made to the credits that omit some of the most important people that worked on the development of the series. Yakuza 0's credits have cut an executive director for Toshihiro Nagoshi, the creator of the series, who left Sega in 2021, to join NetEase. It also removed a line producer credit for Daisuke Sato, who joined Nagoshi at his new studio, as well as director Kazuki Hosokawa, art supervisor Seizo Negai, and design supervisor Koji Yoshida. They also removed the credits for the studios involved in bringing the games to PC, like British company Lab 42, who was responsible for both Yakuza 0 and Yakuza Kiwami, as their website still shows, while QLOC handled the rest, with a team of over 50 people, not just on PC but Xbox as well. Both studios have had their names removed from the credits, replaced with those of a mostly Japanese PC development team. Due to these credit removals, people are assuming that the company is being petty and purposefully removing these names. However, the people in the credits for most Japanese publishers are simply a team or company snapshot of when the credits were finalised, which means the people included in them change as games re-release. The takeaway is that people are moved out of the credits no matter how instrumental their role, and people who did absolutely nothing on the game will still end up in the credits of games they just didn't work on, if they were part of the team when the credits were finalised. It's highly unlikely that someone is editing the credits of these games to cut out specific people, because that's just not how it works. However, in other news, Valve has reportedly been banning Steam games that feature AI-created art assets, unless developers can actually prove that they have the rights to the IP used in the dataset that trained the AI to create them. A developer recently recounted submitting an early version of a game to Steam with a few fairly obvious AI-generated assets, which they said they plan to improve by hand in a later build. In response, they were told that the game could not be approved unless the developer could prove to Valve that they owned all the necessary rights. Valve's response says, "After reviewing, we have identified intellectual property which appears to belong to one or more third parties. In particular, the game contains art assets generated by artificial intelligence that appears to be relying on copyrighted material owned by third parties. As the legal ownership of such AI-generated art is unclear, we cannot ship your game while it contains these AI-generated assets, unless you can affirmatively confirm that you own all the rights of the IP used in the dataset that train the AI to create the assets in your game." Valve said it was failing the build and would give the developer a single opportunity to remove all the content that they didn't own the rights to before resubmitting it. The developer said that they then improved the assets in question by hand, so there was no longer any obvious signs of AI. But after resubmitting the game, it was again rejected, with Valve this time saying, "We cannot ship games for which the developer does not have all of the necessary rights. At this time, we are declining to distribute your game, since it's unclear if the underlying AI tech used to create these assets have sufficient rights to the training data." The Steam developer said they were confused by Valve's decision to reject their game, especially given the availability of some titles on the PC marketplace, which clearly use AI-generated assets, One such title is This Girl Does Not Exist, which was released last September by Cute Pen Games, which bills it as the first game of its kind due to its complete reliance on AI, with its description saying everything you will see here, including art, story, characters, and even voiceover, was generated by machine learning AI. The developer said, "So it seems like Valve doesn't really have a standard approach to AI-generated games yet, and I've seen several games up that even explicitly mention the use of AI. But at the moment, at least, they seem very wary and not willing to publish AI-generated content. So I guess for any other devs on here, be wary of that." But also in the news, Scavengers Studio has had to make the decision to lay off some employees after a bad financial result from Season A Letter to the Future, which, if you're unfamiliar, is a different take on the apocalypse, as it's less about the survival of people than it is about survival culture. Season A Letter to the Future follows a young woman named Estelle as she leaves her village to document people's lived experiences before a cataclysmic event comes to wipe it all away. Its depiction of memories of what became before as both a blessing and a burden is introspective and earnest, though it doesn't resonate with everyone. You may find yourself among those who loved this distinctive narrative adventure game. It was around 5 hours in length, and it released earlier this year on PS5 and PC. To some reviews that praised the open-world narrative game for its beautiful art and piercing meditation on the past and how we process it. However, Scavengers Studio CEO sent an email to staff she'd never planned on writing when she co-founded it nearly 8 years ago. It revealed that Season A Letter to the Future had only managed to sell 60,000 copies in its first 5 months, apparently leaving the small Montreal-based operation out of options. She said, "Given the current global economic context and Season's financial results, we've been left with no choice but to make the difficult decision of downsizing the studio to a smaller, sustainable group of game developers. Unfortunately, this means parting ways with all but approximately 16 members of the Scavengers Studio team. The remaining employees will begin work on a new gameplay-driven project, while the studio claims it will provide financial and psychological support as well as extended health coverage benefits to those who've been laid off." She said it's not a decision that she took lightly, as it's been several months and efforts of just trying to see what they could do, who they could talk to, and how they could leverage more funds. But if you're unfamiliar with the studio in general, it was established in 2015. Scavengers Studio announced the post-apocalyptic free-to-play battle royale The Darwin Project at Microsoft's 2017 Xbox Showcase, which launched in early access a year later. With the indie studio pivoting to its next project a couple years later, that game was of course Season A Letter to the Future, which made a big splash with its trailer when it was revealed at the 2020 Game Awards. Months later, however, an expose piece alleged a toxic work environment at the studio, driven by creative director Simon Darvo, and enabled by Scavengers Studio CEO. She temporarily stepped down, but was later reinstated after an outside investigation by Solertia Consulting Group reportedly found no systemic sexual or psychological harassment at the studio. Simon was then moved to a non-managerial role, and according to his LinkedIn page, he left Scavengers earlier this year to become a creative director at a new, currently unannounced studio. But despite Season A Letter for the Future arriving early in 2023, earning some glowing reviews and having a timed console exclusivity deal with PlayStation, the game sold poorly. They wouldn't reveal its budget or sales goals, but said that a few content updates and discounts in the months following the launch failed to significantly move the needle. Rising interest rates and an uncertain economy didn't make things easier. One thing that she did want to make clear is that the studio's current struggles aren't a reflection of its talent, saying, "Everyone that has been involved either on Darwin or Season, we picked those people and they have been through so many ups and downs with me for the last several years. They are golden, so it's not a reflection of their individual performance of what's going on." However, for our final story, decade-old fighting game Skullgirls has been hit with more than 600 negative Steam reviews in just 24 hours because of a patch that mostly tweaks and removes artwork that the developers say don't reflect their current values or broad vision for the future of the game. The overall Steam rating for Skullgirls remains very positive, but in recent review average has tumbled down to overwhelmingly negative. The Skullgirls content updates and revisions patch was deployed on the 26th of June and affects the PC, console and mobile versions of the game. The changes are summarised in a forum post by game director Charlie Price and target 3 aspects of Skullgirls. allusions to real-world hate groups seen in the dress and iconography of Skullgirls' Black Egret army, particularly its Nazi-like red armbands, instances in which characters are fetishized and or have sexualization imposed upon them, with particular attention towards younger characters, and some content believed to be in poor taste with regard to race. Some of the tweaks only affect artwork seen in galleries where 4 pieces of fan art were removed, and 15 official illustrations were modified. But a number of adjustments were also made to the in-game animations and story mode art. The Black Egret armbands were removed wherever they appeared, for instance, and a story mode illustration showing a black character known as Big Band being beaten by police was also removed. Some non-artwork was changed too, a Soviet announcer voice pack was removed, and the combo counter phrase for 18-hit combos, which had been barely legal, was replaced. In many cases, the alterations are so minor that they are hard to notice unless pointed out. Several illustrations were tweaked to obscure a character's underwear without substantially changing the sexual content of the scene. In his explanation of the tweaks, Price suggested that the core Skullgirls identity hasn't been changed, noting for instance that Skullgirls is no stranger to characters that confidently express their sexuality, and that alterations made with racial sensitivity in mind haven't touched playful references to pulpy themes, that the developers feel respectfully allude to certain stereotypes. Many of the negative Steam reviews complain that the changes, however small, are a form of censorship, with several claiming that it's a result of wokeness. A number also note that Skullgirls was crowdfunded, and argue that, whatever the justification for the changes, the game they paid for has been retroactively altered for reasons they don't accept. Skullgirls has had a storied development history. The original studio, Lab Zero, collapsed after lead designer Mike Zamont publicly joked about the death of George Floyd, and was subsequently accused of inappropriate workplace behaviour, which then led to him laying off the studio's entire staff. The current version of Skullgirls is now maintained by the studio that made the mobile port, Hidden Variable, as well as a studio that was formed by ex-Lab Zero developers called Future Club. Mike is no longer involved with Skullgirls and for the past 2 years has been working as a programmer on another game. The developers at Hidden Variable and Future Club anticipated the backlash to the patch and don't plan to comment further on the changes. As Price said, "We of course realise that some members of the Skullgirls community may disagree with these changes, either in terms of how we chose to address them or whether they were in fact issues that warranted addressing in the first place. Please know that all of these choices have been made following careful consideration and lengthy discussion amongst all members of the current development team. Beyond this point, we do not intend to discuss the particulars of these changes further." And on that note, that's all we have time for this week. If you have any thoughts on anything discussed this week, please leave me in the comment section below as always, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye.